In this video, I'm going to be taking you through a student guide into the essay process. I'm going to show you how to create an initial essay or analytical approach. And then as I take you through, past the planning stage, I'm going to give you some tips and pointers for drafting and also how to then adapt your first approach or your main analysis into appropriate approaches for new and different questions. This will be particularly helpful if you are looking towards creating essay responses in preparation now for your HSC exams or trials, or if you have an unseen component to an assessment task as well. So I'm going to show you how to create an initial approach and then how to look to adapt it in future into new approaches. Let's begin. The first step is the planning phase. And in this step is where you start to map out or organize an approach to your text. And when I say approach, that's essentially a response for a potential essay question. Now, the approach is like your thesis. It's what you think the text is about and what kind of central point or perspective or insight you're going to be making about your prescribed text for the module, for the appropriate module that it goes with. Firstly, you'll need to develop a thesis. Now, the thesis that you have for this essay or any future essay can be adaptable and should be adaptable. So it's okay to have a thesis as a starting point, or maybe more the bones or skeletons of a thesis that you plan on adapting and molding to shape a new question, or depending on what line of argument you need to be taking. So, to create your thesis and, in fact, your introduction, think about these three things up here. These are prompts that will help you to formulate an approach. And the other thing that you can do is you can look at some exemplar responses and band 6 essays, have a look at their introduction and note what is their thesis. And what are they doing in their introduction? How are they following these steps? So, first, consider your author of your prescribed text. What is their purpose in producing their text? And then, what is the didactic intent or the message or the moral that seems to come across to readers about this text? Understanding the didactic intent will also help you to create your own interpretation and your eventual thesis. The other statement you need to consider is what is the link between your text and the rubric. So this is where you can use your rubric thesis that you might have generated way early on in the term and start to now play around with it and incorporate or link it to your prescribed text. So you're actually now making the statement that's the direct link why your text fits within this module rubric. And lastly, you then need to then think about what insight you have about this text. So think about the fact that all your rubrics in English are about the why this text, why this topic. So think about the impact it have on readers in terms of intent and the didactic messages. What might audiences and readers get out of reading something like this? What might they learn about? What might they be exposed to? What consideration might they be making? And ultimately, this is what's going to shape your thesis, because your thesis in response to any rubric question is my text represents this represents this rubric in the following ways. And it does so in order to show to audiences that. So if you're formulating an essay plan and you don't know, you can't recall what your authorial purpose, link to rubric, and insight and impact is, you need to go back and do that. You cannot formulate a thesis without that. Then I want you to consider all three and develop your thesis statement. Again, you can have a look at any you might have produced in class. You can work with your teacher or support tutor to do that. And thirdly, you can also look at example essays and see what kind of thesis those students might have been introducing. It might be something similar to what approach you thought you might have, or, ideally you would use that to springboard and create your own approach. And lastly, when you have your thesis, then you need to think about how that thesis will be broken down across your essay into 2 or 3 body paragraphs. So you will likely need ideas or perhaps themes as an anchor for your thesis. So your thesis might be something a bit more broad and conceptual, saying that your text represents ideas of or elucidates, a human notion of. And then you would use your body paragraphs to look at specific sub ideas that might support that overall concept. They could be themes, they could be connections to the rubric. It just depends on your approach. So, for example, let's say you're doing the common module text and human experience, and your text is the crucible. Your thesis might have something a bit broader and conceptual to do with perhaps how the play demonstrates that societal pressures and personal dilemmas can lead individuals to confront their own self. And also represent the consequences of their choices. You might have something really broad and overarching like that. And then to actually break down that thesis in your body paragraphs, you may try to go a thematic route and look at, for example, fear in one, integrity in another, maybe moral ambiguity. You might actually instead try to attach perhaps a theme or an idea with an aspect of the rubric. So, for example, because it's text and human experience, you might look at fear as the leading human emotion and how it provides a motivator. You might look at integrity and connect that to the ideas of paradox or anomaly or insight. And you can do something similar with moral ambiguity, or actually, relate it to the aspect of the rubric, which is what do modern audiences, how does it still translate and interpret for them? In what way does it allow the reader to question their own nature of morality and the ambiguity of human morality? Once you've broken down your thesis into 3 ideas and 3 kind of directions, then you would start to think about what are key moments in the play, my key quotes, my key language techniques, and also your big form techniques. Okay, if you're doing Crucible, for example, it's a play, so you're looking at dramatic techniques as well as specific techniques that might be playing out in the quotes. If you're doing prose fiction, you're looking at what novel techniques are allowing these ideas to come forth. And if you're doing a film like Truman Show, you're looking at the cinematic features as well as specific scenes and maybe dialogue within. Once you've made the plan, it's time to start drafting your analysis. Now, if you really need an essay question, you can always find the previous HSC question and use that as your springboard. Some students like to write according to a question. It's not entirely necessary. You can write your analysis just based on that thesis and work it that way. However, it is really crucial that whether you're doing bones of an analysis or you're doing an actual essay, you actually have a go at working on that particular one response, doing at least 2 or 3 drafts. So refining it. So never the first time, and that's done. You do it first, take your eyes off it, go back a second, then refine it a third time. You will find that not only does your analysis tighten up and you pick up editing errors, but you will notice how much more sustained the third version is to, let's say, the first or the second. Another great thing that you can do is to get feedback from your teacher. If your teacher is willing to look at an essay and that is okay in regards to your school's assessment policy, then do so. If they can just cite your work and give you general feedback, do so. Even if you come to them in the form of some questions and discuss what your approach is, generally your teacher will be able to give you that little bit of guidance and hopefully that confidence to know that you are on the right track. Ultimately, once you've received feedback and you're happy with the analysis or the essay that you've produced, just double check with yourself. Does it include a clear approach? Are your ideas clear? Do they make sense? A really great strategy is to give it to a friend to read or someone who's not even studying what you are. You might give it to somebody who's doing a different English course, or perhaps a friend from another school, or even a parent, sibling, or other relative. Because even if they don't understand what your rubric is, they will be able to tell you whether what you've written makes sense to them or whether it needs more clarity. Also, you want to consider how sustained your thesis is. So remember that a thesis is sustained is if it carries through the entire essay, so that at every point in each body paragraph, you can see that you are continually coming back to your thesis or your answer to the essay question or your thesis in your analysis. As long as everything ties back, then it creates a more sustained approach. You also want to consider your evidence. Have you selected the best evidence? Is it apt? Is it detailed? Is it thoughtful? And not only that, are you actually, for every piece of evidence, analyzing how that particular bit of evidence, how that line, how that moment, how that technique produced meaning for your thesis? So everything needs to correlate really tightly. You also need to make sure that in that analysis, you are always coming back to the rubric as well. Now, ideally, if you did that thorough plan to begin with, you will find that that's already occurring. But if you feel like there are elements in your analysis and your elaboration that need a bit more detail, think about how you can connect it to the rubric, then relevant meta language, and your overall thesis. Okay, the next step is if you are happy now with your essay and you've received some great feedback on it, it's time to now look at how you can adapt that depending on different questions and different needs of the rubric as well. You can do this in like an umbrella type format. You can start with your thesis and you can just compare your thesis to a range of questions. So your teachers might give you practice questions. There are lots of free lists of practice questions online that you can find as well and access. And it's important to start with at least 3. The more questions you're exposed to and the more questions you have applied yourself to interpret, the less of a shock you're going to get when a really new and unique question gets hit at you. So one way to start is start with your thesis statement that you've already had pre-prepared, and how well can you apply it to that question at hand. Sometimes the question is very similar to your approach anyway, and very little needs to change. Sometimes you've got most of it there, but you might need to consider an extra point or an extra term or an extra rubric idea and reshape it a little bit. Sometimes the question is asking you for a very different and unique approach, and that doesn't mean that your thesis won't necessarily work. It just might mean that you need to think a bit more outside of the box as to how you can adapt and make it relevant. And if worst case, you cannot adapt and make it relevant, then you know that you need to go back with your initial working analysis and see what gaps are there and what needs to be changed. Now, once you've compared the thesis, you then think about your topic and your end sentences as a starting point from all your body paragraphs. Again, same approach. How much, if at all, will they need to adapt? What might you need to do? It's really nice to write these out and do all 3 and just see if there's links and correspondence between all the 3 different approaches. Now, doing it this way is just a really nice 5-10 minute kind of activity. You start from your thesis, you look at your basic and your topic and your links, and then you move forward. On the next page, I'm going to take you through a more detailed and thoughtful way to approach this. Now, this is a much more thorough response, entire essay response type approach. You'd pop your new question in and you would consider your rubric thesis. Does your thesis still work compared to this question? What aspects from this new question are considered really important and you know that you need to highlight in your thesis? And therefore, you can consider what, if anything, needs adapting or changing. Or do you have to have an entirely new kind of approach to fit this specific question? Also think about your question thesis. Is your answer to this essay question featuring the correct key terms and the correct ideas from the question at hand? Again, how, if much, needs adapting. Once you've considered that, you can then compare to the other aspects of your introduction. Does the purpose statement that you have still say the same, or does it require an update with the terms and ideas? Have the rubric points that you have already included in your original intro, do they still work? Are they still relevant? Does more need to be added? And lastly, is your insight or your thesis and interpretation still very workable, or does it perhaps need some thought and reframing? Once you've done that, work down to your body paragraphs. Similar thing with your topic sentences. Are they still addressing the question? How much will they need to shape to successfully address the question? And then think about on the right hand side what's actually in your body paragraphs. Is the selected evidence that you have included in your pre prepared work still relevant, still supporting your question and thesis? Are the analysis statements that go with the evidence, as in the statements where you're actually analyzing and discussing what quotes you selected or what moments were important or what language techniques or form techniques are important? Are those sentences actually still coming back and answering the thesis? And this is something that you need to consider with every new question that you get. Do not assume that the analysis and the evaluation that you have made will 100% apply and be extremely apt for a new question. Sometimes with the question, you can keep pretty much everything as is. Sometimes you might need to just adapt your interpretation and analysis a little bit further to completely hit the question. Once you've done that a bit more in the middle of your body paragraph, then think about your end of your paragraph, particularly lastly, your link sentence. Is that referring back to the thesis? If you are doing all these if you are doing all these things for your 2 to 3 body paragraphs, this is what's going to ensure that one, you are answering the question, and two, that your response is sustained and works as a whole. If you've ever had a teacher say to you, response wasn't sustained, that probably means that there were some sections that were stronger and more fine-tuned than others, and other sections that were maybe a little too broad or did not come back to the question enough. Lastly, once you've looked at least 3 questions and have done at least 3 different approaches, you can do a bit of a comparison here. You consider them together, determine if you have any strengths or any weaknesses, and just see if maybe your overall and initial analysis has reshaped or shifted and changed. And look, likely it will. With each question that you do, there might be more tweaks that you need to make. But remember that by the end of all those tweaks and all that hard work, you should have analysis or bones of a response that are really adaptable, but also really apt in how well they're including evidence and showcasing your knowledge. So, in the end, when you are comparing, have a look at these questions, things to ask yourself. Is it clear, sustained? Is it detailed and insightful, including in ideas and evidence for all types of questions thrown at me? Have I evaluated how language shapes meaning and related that to the thesis in all questions? Are there apt rubric links across the entire essay? Don't just talk about your rubric a bit in the intro and a little bit in your body. It needs to be throughout. That doesn't mean you need to hit every aspect of the rubric in every body paragraph. That would be really difficult. But you might think about holistically making sure that each body paragraph covers a few or a couple different rubric points, and therefore overall holistically you've hit all kind of aspects of the rubric, and therefore are prepared for any kind of rubric question you'll get in the HSC. Also consider, is it adaptable further for a variety of new questions, new rubric elements, new ideas, new concepts? And overall, is it holistic and insightful in that, is it going to allow you to create a personal or unique response to any essay question? Remember, if you are saying the same old things that your classmates are, or the same old things that you have seen in past HSC Band 6 exemplars, then you're not likely to stand out as unique, and your personal voice and insight will not come through and help you stand out to maximize your marks. What I'd like you to do now is have a look. You are either, if you're watching this video, you're preparing your essay, or you are preparing for an exam essay or an unseen exam at school, or your trials or your HSC. I want you to take yourself in each of these steps, look at the parts of the videos that are most necessary and important for you, and I want you to work with these strategies I will give you a soft copy of this resource if you prefer to work on it. Otherwise, follow it and use that to help guide you in your approach and skills. The more that you can establish this strategy now, the easier and quicker it will be for you when you are doing this in your trials and in your HSC.